Hello everybody and welcome back to another stream of Skievers Idle Book Club. It's been a while. It has been a while. I have been sick and it's been very cold. Yeah, out where we keep our PC. It's very cold. So now that it's winter, I just can't deal. But yeah, so welcome back. We're gonna get straight into it and buy some things, and then we'll get straight into the reading. So we'll go for a few hours, and then we should be good. So we're 27.7% of the way through the book. So we'll read a few more chapters tonight and see where we go. So let's get. Oh, there's a golden cookie. Cookie frenzy. Time 7 for 77 seconds. So the bar is right down the bottom. And we go, 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 go. Whoa! That's a lot of cookies. 4 trillion cookies. I could go for 4 trillion cookies right now. As long as they're back biscuits, which are we call them biscuits in Australia. And biscuits in the UK too. So I don't know what other parts of the world have call them biscuits. Like I know obviously the USA call them cookies. But yeah, like are all biscuits cookies, or cookies like only like certain types? So like are cookies just like chocolate chip cookies, or like are all cookies in America or not? Hello in the chat there, Novak. Welcome. We're making 4.5 trillion cookies. Do you want some cookies? Oops, I forgot to read what I just put. Stats, I think. So we got that one. Overworld ovens, cookie production multiplier plus 3%. All of them are cookies, cool. Serendipity, golden cookies appear twice as often and stay twice as long. I think that's what I got. Or did I get that? Which one? I can't remember which one I got. Yeah, no, I know that. Like, I'm talking about biscuits, how we call them biscuits in Australia and you guys call them biscuits in UK. Like, I'm not talking about those type of biscuits, like biscuits and gravy biscuits. Close those stats. Research has begun. Your bingo center / research facility is conducting experiments. Let's buy some more of these. One more of those. Let's see if I can buy 10 of those. Oh, I can only buy 9. How rude. Dimensional shift, eh? Let's see if I can get some. Dimensional shift. News. Cookie farms release harmful chocolate into our rivers, says scientist. Is that how Willy Wonka got his chocolate river? Tourism to Cookieverse popular with bored teenagers. Casualty rate as high as 73%. I'm still like so far away, so that's fine. We'll just deal with that later. Quadrillion fingers, the mouse cursor and cursors gain plus 20 cookies for each non-cursor object owned. Clickety, 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 click. Cool. Got that, so let's we're getting like 54 million cookies every time we click, which is great. So like when a frenzy cookie comes on and it's like 50% or whatever, like great. Or 7%, not 50%. Wow. cool. It's cool. It's cool. But yeah, enjoy your day. Ooh. Just watch it when you can, because I don't know if you're up to date yet on the book, but anyway. But anyway, I'm going to start reading now. So, hello to everybody in the chat watching. Hello to Novak, who's going to watch this back later. Have a good day. And we will get going. Chapter 11. Kiva was burning, falling, drowning, water, so much water she couldn't breathe. Her skin was on fire. It burned, it burned. Down she fell, the wind ripping her apart, the cold shredding her skin. The thwack of a whip, a quiet masculine moan, blood flowing into a drain, darkness, so much darkness. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't breathe. Wake up! Kiva gasped and shot up in bed to find a dark outline of a man hovering over her, gripping her shoulders. She shrieked and threw her fist at his naked chest, thrashing wildly to get free. He made an oomph sound, but only held on to her tighter, trapping her arms. She opened her mouth to shriek again, but then, Kiva, Kiva, it's me! Jaren's voice finally penetrated, causing her to freeze. It was just a nightmare, he said, holding her firmly against his warm, strong body. You're safe. I'm here. He stroked her sweaty hair away from her face and repeated, I'm here. Jaren? Kiva stuttered around her frantic, panting breaths. The room was dark, barely enough moonlight drifting in to make out his concerned features. I've got you, he told her, rubbing soothing patterns on her back. Kiva was quaking so badly that she cuddled into Jaren's bare torso and burrowed her face in the crook of his neck, forgetting that she should be pushing him away instead of clinging to him like a child. From the doorway to her bedroom came Tip's hushed voice. Is she all right? She'll be fine, Jaren answered quietly. You did the right thing coming to get me. Why don't you go and wake Ori and have a sneaky hot cocoa, then go back to sleep? You can talk to her in the morning. Kiva sensed Tip's hesitation, but then she heard the door shut as he left her room. Still clinging to Jaren, Kiva couldn't bring herself to let go, her body continuing to tremble. She didn't even care that they were alone, tangled together on her bed, with him only half dressed. All she knew was that she felt safe in his arms. They were all that was holding her together. He was all that was holding her together. I have them too, you know, Jaren whispered, his fingers combing through her hair. The dreams, ever since Alendov. She burrowed deeper into him, recalling the sounds of distress she'd heard muted through the walls of the Winter Palace. Against his neck she asked, barely a breath of sound, What do you dream about? She knew she should put some distance between them, but she didn't move. Just this once, she told herself. Just this once she would allow herself to forget who she was, who he was, who she was, and rest in the comfort of his embrace. I dream of darkness. I dream of death, Jaren answered slowly. I dream of you falling from that tower and me not catching you in time. I dream of you walking into the crematorium and never coming back out. I dream he swallowed. I dream of finding you at the bottom of the quarry, not breathing. He shuddered against her. I dream of you dying over and over while I just stand there watching. His words prompted flashes of Kiva's own nightmare, falling, burning, drowning, but also the soul-destroying darkness of the abyss, and I saw you getting whipped. The words left her without her permission. Jaren turned as still as a statue. After the day she had, everything she'd heard, everything she'd felt, and was currently feeling, Kiva's guard was completely torn away. Because of that, she couldn't keep from continuing. It was my fault. You saved me, and he hurt you. Her throat caught, making a jagged, painful sound. Sweetheart, Jaren murmured, kissing her temple. She melted into him. She couldn't help it. I'm so sorry, she whispered, the apology coming from deep within her. I never said it to you before. I should have said it to you before. You have nothing to be sorry about. I didn't say thank you either, Kiva went on, not hearing him. She was still half asleep, her words tumbling from her lips without thought. You saved my life, and I never said thank you. I was so angry that you'd lied to me, but you still saved me. I'm alive because of you, her voice became hoarse. What kind of person doesn't say thank you? A comforting stroke of Jaren's fingers. I'm sure you thanked me. I didn't, she argued, gripping him tighter. I didn't. All right, then you're saying it now, Jaren said, his tone pacifying. I should have said it sooner. You're saying it now, Jaren repeated. Kiva fell silent, emotions simmering within her. Her nightmare had left her raw. She was feeling so much, too much. Everything she'd been trying to bury for 6 weeks, for 10 years, was rising to the surface. I'm sorry, she whispered again, the words breaking. You already said that, beautiful, Jaren whispered back, gathering her closer. But this time, Kiva wasn't apologizing for what had already happened. She was apologizing for what lay ahead. And as Jaren continued to hold her, promising he would stay until she fell back asleep, she knew she was in more danger than ever before, because she didn't want to let him go, and she wasn't sure if she ever would. When Kiva woke in the morning, there was a prince in her bedroom, but it wasn't the same prince who had stayed with her after her nightmare until she'd eventually dozed off in his arms. Training, sunshine, Cowden said. Up, up, up. Groggily, Kiva pulled back the covers, wondering when Jaren had left, but grateful that his cousin hadn't caught them in bed together. A painful moan left her as she stood to her feet, her muscles protesting everything she'd put them through the previous day. But Cowden showed her no mercy once they reached the training yard, his second lesson turning into a replica of the first, just with extra box stepping and an added running lap. Kiva again vomited up the contents of her stomach, with Cowden unsympathetically pushing her to her limits and beyond. Sweating like a river and aching all over, Kiva wasn't sure how she made it back to her room afterward, but once she'd soaked in a long hot bath and changed into clean clothes, she began to feel mildly human again. Embarrassment from the previous night tried to creep in, but she wouldn't let it take root. Jaren had been there for her when she'd needed him. Jaren was always there for her when she needed him. She just couldn't think about that, because when she did, she'd seen him in the training yard that morning, facing off against Captain Verus again. He paused, only long enough to look her way and send her a comforting smile before dodging the captain's next sword thrust. But that smile had been enough for her to know that whatever happened between them in the night and in the cavern yesterday didn't require an explanation or definition. They were what they were, Jaren and Kiva. Two people connected for better or worse. It wasn't something Kiva needed to dwell on. In fact, it was something she couldn't dwell on if she wanted to maintain any semblance of sanity. Her plans hadn't changed, even if her heart refused to listen. A knock on her bedroom door startled her from her thoughts, and she assumed it must be Tip coming to check on her after her nightmare. But when she opened it, she found an elderly servant woman who bobbed in to a quick curtsy. Begging your pardon, miss, but the healer who treated you the other night has sent word asking for you to meet her at Silverthorn. Rescinda? Kiva asked. The woman nodded. Yes, miss, I can have her return to the palace if you'd prefer. No, that's fine, Kiva said. It's a beautiful day. It'll be good for me to get out for a bit. Staying active would help keep her sore muscles loose, too. Not to mention it would give her an excuse to have some time away from Jaren. Distance, she reminded herself, was needed, even if she was failing spectacularly at following her own advice. Very good, miss, the servant said, curtsying again and departing. Kiva had planned to spend her day snooping around the palace and mapping the grounds, but with everything she'd learned yesterday, she'd earned herself a break. It wasn't like she could offload the information yet anyway, still having no idea when her siblings intended to reappear. After tugging on her boots, Kiva made her way down to the ground floor and stepped out into the spring sunshine. She'd been told upon arriving in Volenia that she could come and go from the palace as she pleased, the guards having been ordered to give her free rein through the front gates. Because of that, she had no issue leaving the grounds, smiling politely to the royal guards and receiving respectful nods in return. Kiva took her time meandering along the river road towards Silverthorn, breathing in the fresh air and enjoying the sun on her skin. It was the last day of the river festival, but the streets were nowhere near as crowded as the first night, with no pushing or shoving, just pockets of children dancing to upbeat tunes from wandering musicians. It was almost a shame when Kiva reached the academy, her muscles burning anew as she ascended the steep hill atop which the campus rested. Moving stiffly to ease some of her agony, she headed in the direction of the main infirmary, having no idea if Lucinda would be there, but confident someone would be able to point her in the right direction. Strolling down the arched stone pathway, Kiva admired the luscious green sanctuary between the buildings again, marveling at the serenity. She was so lost in her appreciation that she nearly collided with a woman walking in the opposite direction, and did a quick hop step to the side just in time. "I'm sorry I wasn't looking," Kiva broke off when she recognized the head of Silverthorn. "Miss Meriden, what a nice surprise," Healer Matters said warmly. "I was hoping to see you again." Hello," said Kiva, uncomfortably aware that she'd nearly plowed down the elderly woman. "Have you made a decision about your studies?" Mattis asked, pushing wire-framed spectacles up her nose. Well, it was on the tip of her tongue to say she wasn't interested, but she knew her lie would be unconvincing. "I'm still thinking about it," Kiva said finally. Mattis smiled with understanding. "Take as long as you need. As I said the other day, the offer will remain open." Kiva swallowed against the lump in her throat. "Thank you." The matron removed her glasses and placed them in the pocket of her white healer's robe. "If you didn't come to speak with me, what brings you to Silverthorn?" "Healer Lucinda summoned me," Kiva said, and pointed to the bruise on the side of her face. "I'm guessing she wants to see how I'm feeling." "Oh dear," Mattis said gently, turning Kiva's chin to the side. "That must have been a nasty bump." "The swelling went down fast," Kiva said, "but it's still tender to the touch." "Who did you say treated you? Healer Lucinda?" "Lucinda," Kiva corrected. Mattis considered for a moment before she offered an apologetic shrug. "I used to know all of our healers, but there are so many now that I'm not as good with names as I once was. Lucinda, Racinda, Jacinda, Melinda, they all blur together, I'm afraid. It's a peril of growing older, but not the worst, I'll admit." Her dark face lit with self-depreciating humor as she waved a hand down her aging body. "Once everything decides to move south, it's all down here from there. Something for you to look forward to." Kiva couldn't help chuckling. "Someone at reception will be able to help you find her," Mattis went on, gesturing to the infirmary Kiva had already been heading toward. The healer's attention was then snagged by a white-robed group lying on the grass, their faces tinged a sickly green. With a long-suffering sigh, she said, "If you'll excuse me, I need to have a word with some of the novices about their behavior at the festival last night." With a pat on the shoulder, Mattis left Kiva standing on the path, but not before turning back to call, "I'll look forward to hearing once you've made your decision." Kiva said nothing, not wanting to let the matron healer down, not wanting to let herself down, but now wasn't the time. There was too many other things she needed to focus on. Her own desires would have to wait. Right now she deserves a chance to live her life and follow her dreams. Jaren's words to the Royal Council echoed in her mind, but Kiva closed her heart to them. Even if she made the selfish decision to put herself first, the scar on her hand would forever mark her as a criminal. No patient would ever trust her. No healing academy would ever accept her. One close look was all it would take for Mattis to rescind her offer. And yet, Kiva sighed, Jaren's words burrowing deep despite her best efforts to ignore them. Try as she might, she wasn't ready to give up on her dreams. Because dreams were all she had. Dreams where her family was safe and happy and living the life they deserved. Dreams where she studied at Silverthorn and was able to help those who needed her, bringing comfort where there was suffering, light where there was darkness, and hope when all was lost. Dreams where she and Jaren... No, she knew better than to dream about Jaren. Hey, over here! Kiva looked up to see that she'd been walking blindly along the path toward the infirmary, only to discover Lucinda sitting on a bench in the sanctuary and waving at her. Passing through one of the stone archways, Kiva approached the young healer, the grass soft underfoot, the smells of lilac and lavender from the nearby shrubbery tickling her nose. I got your message, Kiva said, taking a seat when Rest patted the wood beside her. While her white robes were spotless, the healer's ashy hair was again in a messy bun, a few tendrils hanging loose around her face. How's the head? She asked, her russet eyes examining the bruise, much like Matters had done. Much better, Kiva said. The aloe gel brought the inflammation down faster than I expected. The poppy milk probably helped too, Rest said with a knowing wink. Kiva grinned. I slept like the dead that night. Not sure if it was wise after a head wound. If memory serves, I did tell you to wake regularly, Rest said dryly. She then asked, other than the swelling, have you been feeling well enough? No slurring, numbness, coordination concerns, drowsiness, vomiting, headaches, anything like that? Admittedly, Kiva had experienced most of those things in the last 2 days, but all of them she attributed to training with Cowden, so she shook her head. You were limping when you walked over here, Ress observed in a leading statement. I've recently started a new fitness regime, Kiva said, moderating her voice to keep from revealing how she really felt about it. Judging by the mirth in Ress's eyes, she wasn't successful. Ah, the healer said, so just your standard muscle aches and pains. If by standard you mean I'm dying, then sure. Ress snickered. I can give you something to help if you want. That would be appreciated. Kiva expected the healer to say she'd have a muscle relaxant sent to the palace, but Ress reached into her pocket and withdrew a small jar filled with pale orange powder. Seeing the look Kiva sent her, Ress explained, I keep what feels like a small infirmary on me at all times. Be ready for anything, I say. She handed over the jar. Mix a pinch of that into your tea, right before bed, and then again when you wake up. You'll feel better in no time. Kiva removed the stopper and gave it a sniff. Buttercress, gingerweed, aloe pods, and she took another sniff. Lermeric. Well done, Russ said approvingly. I heard you have some healing experience. Nothing compared to what you do here, Kiva said nervously, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweater and making sure it covered her scar. Silverthorn is in a league of its own, I'll grant you that, Lucinda agreed, glancing out across the grounds with an awe that Kiva understood deep in her soul. Ress, however, was already living the dream that Kiva could only wish might one day find her. Thanks for coming all the way up here, the healer went on to say. I wanted to check in after everything that happened the other night. Being abducted, that must have been frightening. I was unconscious for most of it, Kiva said, sticking to her lie. Have you visited Calvin? His wound was worse than mine. Ress waited until 2 young healers walked past and continued deeper into the sanctuary before saying, From what I hear, the princess suffered much more grievous injuries in the past. He'll send for someone if he's worried. Unable to help herself, Kiva said, people usually jump at the chance to spend time with him. Pointedly, she added, He's very handsome. Ress scrunched her nose up. He certainly seems to think so. Kiva laughed, surprised and delighted by the healer's candor. Most women fall at his feet. I am not most women. Kiva was beginning to realize that and respect it. So, are you avoiding him on principle because he flirted with you? I'm not avoiding him, Lucinda stated. I just don't want to see him. When Kiva's lips twitched, Ressa's eyes narrowed. You can't judge. You're the one who stabbed him. If that doesn't send a message, I don't know what does. Kiva winced. In my defense, I thought he was someone else. A beat of silence passed, and then suddenly Ress was laughing. A moment later, Kiva joined her. I can't believe you stabbed a prince, the healer exclaimed, holding her stomach. You're enjoying this way too much, Kiva said, though her voice rumbled with lingering humour. You're a healer. Where's your sense of compassion? You're not the first person to ask me that, Ress said, still chuckling. I must have missed the day they taught about bedside manner. Kiva shook her head with amusement, feeling a growing connection to the healer. Their kinship seemed effortless, something that if she'd been at Zalandov, she would have avoided at all costs. But she wasn't at Zalandov now. She didn't have to push people away to save herself the pain that came with their death. That wasn't her life anymore. With that in mind, Ress asked if she wanted to walk down to the river and grab some lunch. Kiva hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. It was all right, she told herself, to start building a life, to start making friends, especially outside of the palace, since Everworld knew any relationships she built there were going to crumble soon enough. So what's your story? Ress asked as they left the academy and began strolling down the hill. I don't have a story, Kiva said, too quickly. Right, Ress said, with clear disbelief. I don't, Kiva argued. I'm just your normal, everyday kind of girl. The scar on your left hand says otherwise. Kiva nearly missed a step, but Ress wasn't finished. Not to mention you were abducted by rebels, you're living at the palace, and the crown prince looks at you like he would burn the world to keep you safe. But sure, you're just a normal, everyday kind of girl. Kiva said nothing, unsure which of Ress's observations was the most damning. Personally, I think normal is overrated, the healer said. She unfastened the band around her hair, her ashy locks catching in the breeze. Normal is tedious. It's boring. The best people are the ones with stories, the ones who have lived through things others can only imagine in their wildest dreams, or their worst nightmares. She looked pointedly toward Kiva's hand. People like you. It was too late for Kiva to cover her scar, but Lucinda didn't seem perturbed by it. There was no judgment in her tone, just curiosity. As for me, the healer went on, sidestepping a small child toddling away from his mother, the crowds growing thicker as they reached the river road. I have a story too. It was a taunting statement, begging for Kiva to ask more, but she knew that in order to receive answers, she had to be willing to give some. Swallowing against her dry throat, she said, I assume that story has something to do with how you ended up at Silverthorn? Ress came to a stop beside the railing, overlooking the river. Her eyes turned dark. It might. Kiva took a minute to think before deciding that since Ress had seen her scar and knew all about her link to the royals, she might as well hear the rest. So she told her. She shared about her time at Zalandov and how she'd met Jaren. She shared about their escape and how they'd spent weeks recuperating in the mountains before venturing to the capital. She shared what she'd been doing with her days, training with Calden and getting to know the royals, but then she stopped sharing, knowing better than to reveal anything about her family or the rebels to a near stranger. Even so, it was still more than she told anyone, ever. When she was finished, Ress whistled through her teeth. I'd heard rumours that the rebel queen was at Zalandov and someone had volunteered to take her place in the trial by ordeal. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Kiva's insides pitched. There are rumours about me? She looked around the bustling river road, half expecting to see families pointing and staring. People like to gossip, Ress said, but don't worry, everyone thinks you're dead. Kiva jolted. Excuse me? Shrugging, Lucinda said, no more news came after the fourth ordeal, so the general consensus was that you failed. Thoughtfully she added, it probably wouldn't be too hard to get word out about your victory, if that's what you want. You'd get a lot of attention. Kiva recoiled at the idea. No thanks. I'd rather be dead. Ress choked on a laugh, and realizing how bad that sounded, Kiva quickly amended, you know what I mean. I'd rather they think I'm dead. The last thing I want is strangers coming up to me and asking questions. Oh no, strangers, Ress said with a dramatic shudder. They're the worst. Kiva rolled her eyes. Your turn. How did you become a healer? Lucinda tugged at her white robe, her humour vanishing. My parents were healers, so I guess you could say I followed in their footsteps. Do they live here in Valenia? No, they don't. Something in Lucinda's voice had Kiva bracing. The healer sighed, as if reluctant to speak now that it was her turn, but nevertheless she shared. When I was 14, a band of Miravan mercenaries slipped past the borders and raided our village. That's not uncommon that far in the north. They usually just take their spoils and leave. But those raiders were different. They weren't after coin. It was winter. They wanted bodies to warm them, and they didn't care how unwilling those bodies were. Our townspeople fought hard, but the mercenaries were ruthless. Rest turned to stare out at the water. They made us pay. All of us. Kiva swallowed, fearing what was to come. My parents did everything they could to keep me safe, Rest said. Her voice wobbled slightly, but then she took a deep breath, her tone deadening as she declared, and then they were slaughtered before my eyes. A small, devastated gasp left Kiva. The mercenaries took me out and Lucinda cut herself off, unable to finish. But Kiva didn't need her to. The haunted look she wore said it all. Taking a moment to regain control, the healer continued. I managed to escape. Timing, chance, luck, a combination of all three. Another family took me in, helped me heal. Shadows grew in her eyes, spreading across her face. There were some dark days, days when I gave up, days when I tried really damn hard not to feel anything, days when I didn't feel anything. In a whisper she admitted, those were the worst. Because when I didn't feel anything, I didn't have anything to hold me here. Kiva's heart clenched. With a sharp exhale, the shadows in Ressa's eyes began to clear. My adopted family saved my life in more ways than one. It took time, but they helped remind me that life is too precious to throw away, no matter how hard it is, no matter how much it hurts. Her throat bobbed. I wouldn't be here today without them. Ressa's final statement was so implicit that Kiva had to blink away tears, realizing the choice the healer nearly made. But she hadn't. She was here. She was alive. She had fought the darkness and won. She had survived, just like Kiva. I told you, Ress whispered, her gaze suddenly looking with Kiva's. The best people have stories, even if they wish they didn't. Kiva blew out a shaky breath, unable to do anything but offer a solemn nod. She knew there was much more to Ress's tale, just as there was more to her own, but they'd both revealed enough for now. The healer seemed to think so too, because she said quietly, I don't usually share about my family to people I hardly know, but you trusted me with your story, so it only seemed fair to trust you with mine. That said, I'd be grateful if you didn't tell anyone. I'm not after pity. Shaking her head, Kiva promised, I would never. And I'll keep your secrets too, Ress said. I hope that goes without saying. It didn't normally, but there was no denying that Kiva felt a connection to the healer. They'd both suffered so much in their young lives that it was as if their souls recognized each other. The pain, the hurt, the healing. Come on, Ress said, turning from the river and pointing to a cluster of market stalls set up further along the water's edge. Feelings make me hungry. I need to stress-eat my weight in chocobuns. And just like that, the heavy conversation passed. Chocobuns? Kiva asked. Ress looked at her aghast. Don't tell me they didn't serve you chocobuns in prison. Kiva sent her a deadpan expression. The healer grabbed Kiva's elbow and dragged her toward the stalls. My friend, your life is about to change forever. Lucinda was right. And she was wrong. The chocobuns turned out to be divine, smooth, velvety chocolate chunks mixed into a dough that melted in her mouth. But as good as they were, they didn't change Kiva's life. No, it was what happened after she and Ress had ingested enough to warrant stomach aches, when they were walking back to the hill, to the academy, moaning about never eating again. It was just as they reached the entrance to Silverthorn and came to a stop, ready to part ways, that a man hobbled past them, heading toward the infirmary. He was holding his side, a look of pain on his face, but when Ress asked if he needed assistance, he politely declined her offer. He continued on, and Kiva put it from her mind, or she would have, if not for the tingling she felt in her hands, the glow that erupted from her fingertips. Ress sucked in a breath. What the? Pure, unadulterated panic filled Kiva, and she shoved her magic away harder than ever before. The golden light winked out like a candle, her skin normal once again, but the force of the suppression left her feeling nauseous, a headache stabbing at her temples. Lucinda's russet eyes were narrowed on Kiva's hands. Did you just say, I need to go to Oak Hollow? Kiva blurted out the words, partly in an effort to distract Ress, but mostly because she couldn't ignore the facts any longer. 3 times in 3 days her magic had risen to the surface against her will. She had no idea what was causing it, but she couldn't risk it happening again, not while she was living at the palace. If Jaren saw, if anyone saw, Kiva needed to speak with her siblings. She couldn't keep waiting for them to come to her. They could take days before making contact again, weeks even. Judging by what was happening with her magic, Kiva might not have that long. She had to risk seeking out Torel and Zulika herself, praying that they'd be able to help. Neither of them had exhibited magic as children, but that could have changed. Even if it hadn't, their mother had once possessed healing magic, despite having chosen not to use it in order to keep them safe from discovery. Maybe Tilda had told them something that could explain what was happening to Kiva, and how she could bring her magic back under control. Oak Hollow, Lucinda repeated. What's in Oak Hollow? Offering a truth not even Jaren knew. Kiva swallowed and said, My family. Swallowing again as she asked, Do you know how I can get there? Ress was looking at her closely, her gaze shifting from Kiva's face to her hands and back again. She then shook her head as if deciding that whatever she'd seen must have been a trick of the light, and Kiva nearly fainted with relief. It's fairly easy, the healer said, pushing windswept hair behind her ear. You just follow the river road and turn off it to leave the city, through the South Watch, then head straight through the farmlands until you reach the first crossroads. After that, you take a left, then a right, then... Ress continued giving instructions, which Kiva tried to memorize, but the healer soon paused, and whatever she saw on Kiva's face. You know what? I'm due to head to Oak Hollow for some house calls this week, she said. Why don't I move my trip up to tomorrow, and you can tag along with me? I'll have to leave you alone for a few hours once we get there, but that'll give you time with your family, and at least you won't get lost. Kiva was so grateful that she could have hugged the healer. You don't mind? I have to go at some point anyway. You're not terrible company. Ress's quick grin told Kiva that maybe she wasn't the only one to feel a growing friendship between them. Because of that, and a myriad of other more desperate reasons, Kiva asked, What time should I meet you? They quickly came up with a plan for their departure the next morning, with Kiva intending to leave the palace right after her training session with Calden. If anyone asked her, she would say she was spending the day with a Silverthorn healer. Not a lie, even if it implied she'd be at the academy. It was the perfect cover, Kiva realized somewhat bitterly, but she pushed away her guilty thoughts to focus on the positive. Tomorrow she would see her brother and sister again, and while she had things to tell them, and more importantly, needed their help with her magical problem, she was also going to make the most of the opportunity. She had questions, and it was about time they were answered. Chapter 12. As planned, Kiva started the next day with her early morning fitness training. Another grueling session, but on the plus side, she only vomited once. Sorry. The only hiccup came when Jaren called out just as she was leaving the training yard. For a moment she feared he might have cleared his schedule to spend time with her, but he only apologized for not seeing her much the previous day, claiming to have been away from the city, helping to rebuild a village nearby. Before she could ask about it, he inquired about her visit to Silverthorn, and she launched into her account of her hours spent with Lucinda. Jaren seemed delighted to hear about their budding friendship, making it easy for Kiva to share her false plans for the day, with him saying he was relieved because he had a full plate of meetings ahead anyway. Hearing that, Kiva worried about missing an opportunity to eavesdrop, but when he mentioned the Merchants Guild, the Dockworkers Union, and the Minstrels Society, among others, she realized that appointments would be similar to the latter half of what the Royal Council meeting had covered, none of which would be relevant to her spying mission. They parted ways when a message arrived from the Minister of Finance requesting Jaren's immediate presence, causing him to look at Kiva with woeful eyes, begging for her to save him. She only grinned and teased, "Poor baby prince," before telling him that the sooner he went to his meetings, the sooner he could be free. Back in her room, Kiva bathed quickly and ate a light breakfast as she dressed for her outing, adding a hooded cloak to protect her from the coastal breeze she would encounter on her journey, and affording her discretion if needed. Remembering to pinch a dose of muscle relaxant in her tea to help stave off the pain Cowden's session would later prompt, Kiva gulped it down and hurried from her room. She only paused twice on her way out of the palace, once when she passed Tip and Oriel chasing flocks through the halls, the middle-aged tutor, Edna, running after them and mumbling a prayer for patience, and the second time when Nari called her name, right as she was stepping out of the entrance hall. "I hear you're heading to Silverthorn again," the guard stated. Kiva was surprised that Nari wasn't shadowing Jaren's footsteps. But then she realized that many of his conversations must be confidential, just like the Royal Council meeting. "I'm spending time with one of the healers," Kiva confirmed, keeping her expression open and honest. Nari looked at her closely before saying, "Jaren says it's important that you don't feel trapped here, and that you've had 10 years of being a prisoner, and you deserve to remember what it means to be free. The last thing I want is to make her feel like she's trapped in another kind of cage." Jaren's words from 2 days earlier returned to Kiva, his thoughtfulness cutting her deep all over again. "But you should know he's worried about your safety," Nari continued, "especially after what had happened the other night. He won't take away your freedom. He'd never do that to you, so I'm asking you to have a care." Her amber eyes held Kiva's. "I've posted extra sentries along the river road with orders to watch out for you, but there's a lot of foot traffic between here and Silverthorn, and even the most attentive of guards can miss things. Jaren won't say it at the risk of making you feel shackled, but I think you already know it would destroy him if something happened to you, so be smart." Kiva's breath was trapped somewhere in her lungs, stopping her from responding, but she nodded her understanding and her agreement. "Cowden says you're useless with a blade," Nari went on, pulling a dagger from her cloak, "but I'd still feel better knowing you had one, just in case." Trying to hide the tremble in her hands, Kiva took the weapon and listened as Nari offered instructions on how to strap it to her calf, tucked beneath the leather of her boot, but still within easy reach. "Don't stab yourself," Nari warned. "Why do people keep telling me that?" Kiva muttered. Nari's lips twitched before she repeated her demand to be careful, and vanished back into the palace. Letting out a long breath, Kiva set off for Silverthorn, mulling over the guard's conversation. She didn't like the idea that Jaren was worried about her, but then she reminded herself that she shouldn't care what he felt. "The last thing I want to do is make her feel like she's trapped in another kind of cage. Everworld help her. Why did he have to be so Jaren?" She knew it would be easier for him to order guards to follow her, or even request that she stay inside the palace grounds where it was safe, but he hadn't, instead putting her needs first, just as he always had. On that thought, Kiva shook her head and imagined a mental door slamming shut, picking up her pace as she headed along the river road. She was acutely aware of Nari's patrolling guards monitoring her from somewhere amongst the crowds, but instead of their hidden presence making her feel safer, her skin was crawling, like they would somehow be able to read her mind and her guilt. The feeling only passed when she ascended the hill to Silverthorn and reached the campus grounds, finding Lucinda waiting for her at the arched entrance. Perfect timing, the healer said with a bright smile. She had a large pack slung over her shoulder, likely filled with her medical supplies for the day. Ready for an adventure? Kiva was more than ready. Even if her stomach bubbled with nerves as she followed Rest to the small stable complex, situated just through the academy's front gates. I'm guessing you haven't ridden much in the last 10 years, Rest asked, approaching a young stable boy who held the reins of two healthy-looking horses, a chestnut one and a grey one. That would be accurate, Kiva said, warily eyeing the horses. The last time she'd ridden on her own, it had been atop her family's docile old pony, a much, much smaller creature than those standing before her. We'll go easy, Rest promised, before helping Kiva mount the grey mare, who was charmingly named Bluebell. Purposefully ignoring how far away the ground was, Kiva waited until Rest was mounted on the chestnut one before she casually asked, "Any chance we can avoid taking the river road out of the city?" A beat of silence passed before the healer observed, "It sounds suspiciously like you want to sneak out." Thinking of the added guards monitoring the main thoroughfare, Kiva admitted, "I haven't told anyone where we were going, and I'd prefer to keep it that way, at least until... She didn't have to finish her sentence, but Ressa's features softened. "Hey, we all have our secrets," she said, with understanding. "As long as they don't put either of us in danger, I don't mind keeping yours. I meant it when I said that yesterday. You can trust me." Kiva blew out a breath. "Thanks." Lucinda considered for a moment before saying, "I know the back streets pretty well. We can use them to get to the South Watch, but we'll have to jump back on the main road after we're through the city walls." "That's fine," Kiva said. They were probably safe to take the river road the entire way, since Nori had mentioned how the busy traffic meant the guards could miss things, but they wouldn't be expecting Kiva to be on horseback. But the back streets would limit the risk significantly. With the new route set, Rest gave Kiva a brief reminder of the riding basics, and they set off together from the academy. Oak Hollow was a half-hour ride from Volenia, but that wasn't counting how long it took them to reach the edge of the city. Their pace slower than it would have been if they'd taken the direct route along the river. Still, they eventually reached the South Watch and rode straight toward the wide-open gates, passing travellers coming to and from the capital, many driving cartloads with wares to trade, others wearing sigils marking them as messengers, and some just common city folk going about their days. Kiva kept the hood up on her cloak and avoided eye contact with any of the watch guards, but she and Lucinda encountered no problems, and were soon through the fortified city walls and riding swiftly along the well-worn dirt road. At first the crowds remained thick, but as they continued on, passing farms on either side until they turned off onto the coastal track, they eventually had the road to themselves. "How's your confidence?" Rest asked, gesturing towards Bluebell. "Ready to pick up the pace?" "If I fall off and break my everything, you'll put me back together, right?" Kiva asked, only half joking. The healer grinned and nudged her horse forward, prompting Kiva to do the same with Bluebell, the mare's long legs easing up the ground as they followed the track up a smooth rise, and then along the cliffside, path hugging the coastline. The sea breeze was crisp, but with the wind having pushed back her hood and her hair flying out behind her as they cantered high above the cerulean ocean, Kiva felt more invigorated than she had in a long time. She wanted to whoop and shout and laugh at the feeling, longing for it to last forever, but all too soon they had to leave the seaside and slow down, passing through numerous crossroads and into a heavily wooded forest. "We're nearly there," Rest said, tossing a water flask to Kiva. She indicated the trees surrounding them and continued, "This is the Emelda Forest. Oak Hollow sits to the edge, but the woods continue all the way down to Avila. It's easy to get lost in here, so make sure you don't wander too far from town today. You wouldn't be the first person to never come out again." Kiva shuddered, the shadowy woodland seeming more sinister than before. But then the trees began to thin as the path opened up, a small picturesque village coming quickly into view. "If I leave you at the tavern, are you good to make your way to your family on your own?" Ress asked as they rode out from the forest and into the bright sunshine. Kiva nodded, even if she had no idea yet where in the village her family was, but the tavern would be the best place to ask after them. Together, Kiva and Ress ventured deeper into the village, passing little wooden cottages with flower pots in their window, before finding a blacksmith, a small apothecary, a tailor's workshop, a bakehouse, an outdoor market. In the center of it all was a larger establishment, with a painted sign hanging over the door, curved script reading, "The Tippled Boar," resting above the picture of a dancing pig that somehow managed to look highly inebriated. "There's a stable out back," Ress said, when they halted near the entryway. Before she'd even finished, a young girl ran up to them, hay sticking to her messy clothes and the pungent smell of manure making it clear what her role was. Lucinda flicked her silver coin and motioned for Kiva to dismount. She groaned when she landed on the ground, her legs stiff and her backside aching despite the medicinal powder she'd taken that morning. "Just wait until tonight," Ress confirmed, gathering her reins. We'll have you back in the city well before dark." Kiva agreed, since the last thing she needed was for someone from the palace to start worrying enough to seek her out of Silverthorn. "If you need any help with your patients," Kiva trailed off, realizing that she didn't know how to end her offer, since it wasn't as if she could say, "Come and find me." Thankfully, Ress didn't notice her hesitation and just said, "Thanks, but you enjoy your time with your family." Kiva hoped that was possible, but considering their last encounter, she wasn't holding her breath. Waving, Lucinda nudged her horse away from the tavern. Kiva watched until she disappeared deeper into the village, then turned her attention back to the painted pig. She was careful to wipe the distaste from her expression before she stepped through the open doorway. The interior of the Tippled Boar was much like any other inn she had encountered, both as a child with her parents and during the more recent weeks of travel from the Winter Palace to Volenia. Low-lit luminium beacons chased away most of the shadows, and yet the grimy space still remained dark and gloomy, even with the sunshine trying to peek through the dirty windows, all of which were surrounded by numerous stuffed boar heads mounted to the walls. An overpowering scent of ale tickled Kiva's nostrils as she walked deeper into the room, where a handful of patrons already sat at wooded tables and swayed on stools despite it being barely mid-morning. She kept her head down as she passed them, moving straight to the oaken bar at the back of the room, behind which stood the middle-aged innkeeper, wiping a soiled cloth along the wood. "Hello," Kiva said. The man flicked his dark eyes up to her, but said nothing. I'm hoping you can help me find someone," she said. "You ordering a drink?" he asked in a gruff, gravelly voice. Well, Kiva stuttered before pasting a friendly smile on her face. "It's a bit early for me, perhaps later after I found who I'm looking for." Again, the innkeeper said nothing. Kiva took that as an invitation and asked, Do you know Zuleika and Toril Meriden? She didn't dare use the name Quarantine, hoping her siblings weren't foolish enough to go about flaunting their bloodline. They're a little older than me, similar features. Who wants to know? The innkeeper asked. Their sister, Kiva Meriden. Kiva asked. Kiva Meriden. A thunk sounded from beside her when a full mug of ale slammed onto the bar, liquid sloshing over the sides as an older man toppled onto the nearest stool and leaned precariously toward her. Kiva, he slurred. That's a pretty name. I'm Grummedon. He looked pleased with himself when he finally shared his name, hiccuping between attempts and smiling a brown-toothed grin at her. How's about some bread, Grum? The innkeeper asked, his gruff voice softening as he looked at the man. Some stew on the house? Grummedon took a swig of his ale. It's too early for food, but keep these coming. He waved the mug, more sloshing over the edges, some splashing down onto Kiva's boots. Grum, the innkeeper started, but the drunken man spoke over him. What's a purty place like you doing in a girl like this? Grummedon asked Kiva. I'm looking for my family, she answered his mangled question. Zuleika and Toril Meriden. Ha! Grum said, slamming his mug loudly, a wave of foam slopping over the top. I knews it, he said. No more. So Kiva prompted. You knew what? Grummedon pointed a gnarled finger at her. You have your mama's eyes. Before Kiva could get over the shock of his statement, his body slumped and his head fell onto the bar, with loud, drunken snoring erupting from his wide-open mouth. The innkeeper sighed and took the mug away, wiping up the spilled liquid. Every day the same. He'll be out for hours. At whatever he saw on Kiva's face, he added, Grum's lived a hard life, but he does all right. He's got people who care for him. They'll come and get him soon, make sure he's safe and warm. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Unable to help herself, Kiva rasped, Was my mother one of those people? The innkeeper said nothing, his standard response, but he surprised her when he pulled a piece of grubby parchment and a quill out from beneath the bar. Write a note. I'll see what I can do, he offered, albeit still gruffly. Hope filled her, but Kiva was quick to say, I need to see them today, as soon as possible. It's important. The innkeeper made no promises, only repeated, I'll see what I can do. Realizing it was the best deal she would get, Kiva hurried to write her message. And it's 3 lines of symbols. I'm at the Tippled Boar, need to speak with you, urgent. There was nothing secretive about what she wrote, but she still used the code, only her siblings would understand. Falling back into old habits. What's this? The innkeeper asked, holding the note up to the light and frowning. Zuleika and Toril Meriden, Kiva reminded him. They'll be able to read it. He made a grunting sound and placed it in his back pocket, but he made no move to do anything with it. When I said it's important, I mean life or death, Kiva told him. Her life or death, if she didn't get her magic under control. Please, I only have a few hours. His eyes came back to her. You order in a drink? Kiva gritted her teeth and shook her head. He jerked his thumb to a doorway at the back of the tavern. Then you can wait outside. Please, Kiva said again, this time a whisper. The man only pointed again and turned to disappear into the room behind the bar. A young woman took his place, pulling a face as she picked up his soiled cloth and swapped it for a fresh one. With nothing left but to trust the innkeeper would pass along her message, Kiva sighed and headed in the direction he'd pointed, stepping through the doorway to find a small open courtyard. There were no other patrons outside, so she removed her cloak and sat at one of the wooden tables. Seconds later, the barmaid appeared and placed a steaming mug in front of Kiva, smiling and winking before she vanished back inside, calling over her shoulder, Say hi to Tor for me. Having no desire to read into the suggestive words, Kiva took a sip of the drink, spiced milk and honey, and tipped her face to the sunshine, willing her tight limbs to relax as she resigned herself to wait. Oh, now there's a frenzy. I'm just going to mute for a moment so I can have a drink and get sorted, and then I'm going to play some more before we read another couple of chapters. Okay. Alright, total chapters, number of chapters finished. So we just finished chapter 12. So that needs to be a 12. And we just finished page 148. So 148. So now we are 34.5% of the way through the book, which is great. So, we're almost halfway. So let's go back to here and grab some more stuff. We have completed one mind. One mind. Each grandma gains +1 base CPS, which is cookies per second, for every 50 grandmas. Note the grandmothers are growing restless. Do not encourage them. I'll show you about that. Brain transplant. Portals are twice as efficient. This refers to the practice of merging higher dimensional universes of brains with our own in order to facilitate transit and harvesting of previous cookie dough. Prisms are twice as effective. Alright, let's go with another 10. Oh, I could only do 5, do another 10, do 4 of those, so 1 over 10 grandmas, another 10, another 10 farms, 5 factories, that's fine, so we'll get those done. And now, we'll get back into it and we'll read a couple more chapters. Probably not going to have as long of a stream, because I mean, reading is very tedious, and if I get too tired, I tend to just like mix words, and it's not fun for anybody. So, I'm not going to have a very long stream tonight. I might read. I'll at least read 2 more chapters now. And we'll see how late it gets to. But I might read another 2 after that. So read 6 chapters total tonight, or I might read 5. We'll just see how we go. But yeah, we'll go from there, and we will continue on. So I'll just mute for another minute to have another drink, just before I get started. So. Okay. Chapter 13. Kiva was pacing the courtyard after finishing her drink, time having slowed to a crawl. There was no sign of her siblings yet, but she couldn't sit around waiting all day. If the innkeeper wasn't going to come through for her, she would just have to find someone else to ask. Decision made, Kiva threw her cloak back on, but just as she started toward the tavern doorway, heavy footsteps met her ears, and a tall figure hurried out from the darkness. Kiva's shoulders slumped with relief at the sight of her brother, who wasted no time in closing the distance between them. "Are you insane?" he asked, hugging her tightly. "What were you thinking, coming all the way here?" "Nice to see you too, Tor," Kiva said, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. He pulled back to look at her, his emerald eyes roaming her face, and then he renewed his embrace, sighing quietly beside her ear. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "Of course I'm happy to see you, but it's so dangerous. How did you get away from the palace? Did anyone follow you? Have you—" Kiva drew away, unable to keep from smiling. "You were never such a warrior when we were kids." "I'm not a warrior now," Tora looked pointedly at her and amended. "Except for when it comes to my baby sister, who I love more than the world, and want to make sure stays safe." Throat tightening, Kiva noted, "I'm not much of a baby anymore." "You'll always be my baby sister," Tor argued. "Whether you're 7 or 70, I'll never stop wanting to protect you." He moved a step backwards. "Now, why did you risk coming here, Mouse? Did something happen?" Mouse, Little Mouse, her father's nickname for her. Kiva had to blink back tears, having forgotten that Tor used to call her that as well. It took her a moment before she could respond. "Something's wrong with me. I need to talk to you and Zuli somewhere private." Toril held her gaze before he nodded and grabbed her hand, leading her back into the tavern. His skin was firm, his fingers calloused, bringing Kiva's attention to the deadly array of weapons strapped to him, just like last time. Her brother was a warrior. so different from the young boy who had picked wildflowers with her and chased butterflies in the meadow beside their cottage, from the child who had nursed an injured fawn back to health and declared that he would spend his life aiding sick animals. There was no trace of that gentle boy in the hard young leading Kiva in the hard young man leading Kiva through the gloomy tavern, every part of him edged and lethal. At least physically, on the inside, she still saw traces of the brother she'd always felt closest to. The first time Kiva had used magic, it was Tor whom she had gone to for comfort, her parents having never shared about Tilda's bloodline, in the hope that none of their children would inherit her healing power. Kiva still remembered begging her mother for stories of the ancient royals Serana Valentis and Torvin Quarantine, just as she remembered wishing for her own magic. When the golden light had exploded out of her one day, it was Tor who had held her close as their mother finally shared her secret, warning that a target would be painted on Kiva's back if anyone learned the truth of what she could do. It was Tor who had wiped the tears from her eyes and promised he would keep her safe, that nothing would ever happen to her. He hadn't been able to keep that promise, not as a child, but something told Kiva that the man he'd grown into would fight until his last breath, if that meant protecting her from harm. "Pull up your hood," Toril ordered quickly, as they reached the tavern exit. He dipped his chin in farewell to the barmaid, but there was no sign of the innkeeper. Kiva would just have to thank him when she returned. "I have a mare in the stable," she said, as he led her toward a dark horse tethered to the hitching post. "Should I—" But before she could finish, Toril swung onto his mount, hauling her up behind him, her legs catching uncomfortably on his bulging saddlebags. "Keep your face covered," he told her, "and hold on." Kiva's hood flew back as they took off at a gallop, but she didn't dare loosen her grip on him, certain she'd fall straight off the rear of the horse. Reaching the edge of the village, Tor steered them away from the main road and into the dense trees, dodging branches and splashing through creeks at an alarming pace. When they finally slowed, Kiva was breathing heavily and clinging to him with a white-knuckled grip. "Are you trying to kill us?" she cried, slapping his shoulder. Toril had the audacity to chuckle. "Oryx knows these woods inside and out. We're perfectly safe. One misstep and we could have broken our necks. You know I'd never let that happen," Tor said. "Is your hood still up?" "No, my hood isn't up," she gritted out. "It hasn't been up since you tried to beat the land speed record for the fastest idiocy on horseback." "That's not a thing," Tor said, humour threading his tone. "We're coming up to camp, and I don't want to risk anyone seeing your face, so pull it back up." He dug through one of his saddlebags and withdrew a silvery object, passing it back to her. "Put that on too." Kiva was vaguely aware of Tor withdrawing another silvery object, keeping that one for himself, but her focus was on what she held. Between her fingers was a mask, one made almost entirely of coiled serpents, vipers if she had to guess. Leaning around Toril, she saw he also held a mask, his forged into a distinctly canine shape. "The viper and jackal," Kiva mused. "They really have no idea who you are, do they?" "We don't trust easily," Toril said, affixing the mask to his face. "Not even among our own." Kiva followed his lead, donning what must have been Zuleika's mask, and raised her cloak again. "It served us well," Toril went on as they picked their way through the now thinning trees. "Only those in our inner circle know our identities. The rest of the time we wear masks, even doing day-to-day work around the camp. It was Mother's idea. All royals wear masks, she told us, but mostly she wanted Zuli and me to be able to move about the kingdom as freely as possible, not having to look over our shoulders all the time." There was a sad, wistful note in his voice when Kiva had given him a gentle squeeze around his middle. She opened her mouth to offer comfort, but the words dissolved as they reached the edge of the forest, the trees falling away to reveal an immense glade, the view beyond making her gasp quietly in amazement. Tent after tent lined the clearing, too many for her to count, each one basic aid from some larger structures towards the center of the camp. It was in that direction Tor was steering them, with men and women of all ages calling out greetings as they rode by, addressing him as Jackal and staring with clear adoration in their eyes. He was their general, Kiva remembered. He fought with them, fought for them. Everything he did was for these people, these rebels, their rebels, Kiva reminded herself. Because these were her people too, all of them devoting their lives to see her family reclaim what was stolen from their ancestor when he was nearly killed and forced into exile. For centuries, the rebel movement had slowly grown, dedicated to taking back the throne on Torvin's behalf, but never sorry about that. Um, but never before had they allied with any of his heirs and stood a chance at legitimately removing the Valentis family from power. Kiva needed to know how it had happened, how Zulika had become the rebel commander, how Toril had become their general. She needed to know why their mother had forsaken her own warnings about the rebels, having always claimed they could never learn that the quarantine bloodline lived on. For so long, Tilda had denied her own magic to keep her family from discovery, and yet here Kiva was, at the heart of the movement her parents never, ever intended for them to join. Zulika's in the command tent just up ahead, Tor said, pulling Kiva from her thoughts. The canvas is thick enough for privacy. We can talk freely in there. Kiva's palms began to sweat as they came to a halt outside the largest tent. Tor helped her slide down to the ground, dismounting after her and giving Oryx a hearty pat on the back. At his low whistle, a young boy ran over, smiling fondly at Tor before leading the horse away. After you, Toril said, indicating the tent's entrance. Straightening her shoulders, Kiva stepped inside, noting the open space that was mostly empty aside from the long wooden table laden with papers. A map of Wendoral was strung along the canvas wall, nearly identical to the one Kiva had seen in the Royal Council room. Movement caught her eye, and she turned to find Zulika sipping from a steaming mug. Watching her closely, there was no sign of surprise in her blank features, no sign of warmth either. Especially when she said, "You're not supposed to be here." Stung, Kiva unfastened her mask and shot back. "If you'd hit me much harder the other night, I wouldn't have been." Torel stopped beside her, removing his own mask to reveal his puzzled expression. "What's this about?" Zulika didn't answer him, and despite still being upset about the head wound, Kiva didn't want to tattle on her sister. Only 2 days ago she'd decided to try harder at mending what had broken between them, and she was determined to follow through on that, even if they weren't off to a promising start. "Nothing," she said. "And I don't have a lot of time. I came from Bulimia with a friend, and she's meeting me back at the tavern in a few hours." "A friend?" Zulika raised a dark eyebrow from the palace. "Of course not," Kiva said. "I'm not stupid." She didn't appreciate the way her sister's mouth twitched into a smirk, so she ignored Zulika entirely and walked over to the table, resting the serpentine mask on its surface and taking a seat. Tor followed and sat beside her, with Zulika only doing the same after a firm look from him, but not without rolling her honey-gold eyes, as if she were horribly inconvenienced by Kiva's visit. "What brings you to see us, little sister?" Zulika drawled. "Feeling homesick? Wanted to cuddle?" Kiva's good intentions evaporated swiftly at her sister's passive aggression. "What's your problem with me? We're on the same side. You can cut the attitude." "I don't know what you're talking about," Zulika said, swirling her tea. "I'm delighted to see you. You've made my week." Torel sighed wearily and muttered something too low for Kiva to hear. Taking a deep, calming breath, she reminded herself that she had no idea what Zulika had been through in the last 10 years. While she couldn't imagine that it compared to being abandoned inside a death prison, there were many different kinds of hell a person could live through. Focusing on her task, she considered why she was there, debating where and how to begin. There was so much she needed to tell them, but she couldn't keep her own curiosity contained a moment longer. "I'd like to know about Mother," Kiva said. "How did she end up at Zalandorf? How did you end up with the rebels? What happened after that night?" Zuleika snorted. "Look at you, risking your life for a story. Figures. I'm not risking my life. No, just all our lives." Zuleika's humour fled so fast that Kiva realised it had never been there to begin with. "Did you think of that before you tore off out of Valedia? Did you give a damn about anyone but yourself? You were never this selfish when we were younger, but I guess 10 years of putting yourself before everyone else leaves a mark." "Zuleika," Tor snapped. "That's enough." Kiva tried not to show how much her sister's words hurt, how unfair they were. A lump lodged in her throat, but she spoke around it to say, "I came here because I'm having trouble controlling my magic, and I need your help to keep from getting caught." She swallowed. "But I'm also not leaving until you tell me about Mother. I deserve to know the truth." She didn't mention the Royal Council meeting, unwilling to reveal all her cards without first getting something in return. "What's wrong with your magic?" Tor asked, concern flooding his face. Kiva shook her head. "You first." Seeing the serious set of her features, he yielded. "The night the soldiers came, we fled to a cottage in the mountains. There were people inside waiting for us. Rebels. But the rebels never knew about our family," Kiva argued. "Mama and Papa were careful too. They didn't know anything for sure, but they'd been chasing rumors for years, one of which eventually led them to us in Riverfell. The leader at the time, a man named Goldrick, had approached our parents in the marketplace, but Mother and Father had laughed away his claims." The corded muscles in Tor's arms tightened. "That night, that everything happened, Mother took us straight to Goldrick and offered to join the rebel cause in exchange for one thing." "What thing?" Kiva whispered. It was Zuleika who answered, uttering one word: "Vengeance." Unbidden of the memory of Karen being stabbed flooded Kiva's mind. Following by Farron being dragged away by the royal guard, she pushed the images away, even knowing they would never leave her completely. Over the next years, we stayed with Goldrick and his closest confidants, moving from safe house to safe house, with them plotting and planning and scheming with Mother, Tor went on. "We learned to fight, to protect ourselves, and Mother," his voice caught, "Mother started using her magic publicly, no longer caring who might discover us." "Skip ahead, Tor," Zuleika said, still swishing her tea. "She doesn't need a history lesson." "Feel free to jump in at any time," Torrell shot back. Zuleika still... Zuleika sent him a sickly sweet smile. "But you're doing such a good job." Kiva looked closely at her siblings, noting the unmistakable tension between them. A decade ago, they'd been close. Not as close as Kiva and Tor, but close enough to love each other dearly. This strain between them, this anger, Kiva had no idea what might have caused it. Eventually, they decided that it was time for Mother to take over leadership from Goldrick. Toril said, "She had quarantine blood. She was the rightful ruler." "Our rightful ruler," he corrected. "Goldrick remained her closest advisor, but she had final say over everything the rebels did, up until our numbers had been slowly growing. Up until then, our numbers had been slowly growing, as whispers spread about the return of Torvin's heir, but Mother was restless and wanted things to move faster. Once the reins were in her hand, she started a campaign for active recruitment, with rebels going from village to village, encouraging people to follow her cause. Her cause, our cause, another quick correction. Kiva caught onto his word choice and asked, "When you say encouraging..." Tora looked across the tent, not meeting her eyes. "She did what she had to do. We did what we had to do." Their attacks grew bolder to the point that they became openly hostile, causing damage to villages and loss of life to those who stood against them. Kiva swallowed at the memory of Jaren's words from 2 days ago. You hurt people, she whispered. Killed people. Only if they tried to hurt us first, Zuleika said, inspecting her fingernails. They got what they asked for. She met Kiva's stricken gaze, her own eyes cold. Wars aren't won without sacrifice, little sister. Anyone who stands against us is our enemy, and enemies don't deserve mercy. Why should we care about them when they don't care about us? But Zuleika was wrong. Kiva knew at least one person who did care about all his people, including the rebels. Did Mother ever consider that maybe there was another way? Kiva asked, her voice rough. That innocent people didn't have to suffer in her quest for vengeance? Innocent? Zuleika barked out a laugh. You've been spending too much time with your handsome prince. It doesn't take much, does it? Baby blue eyes and tousled golden hair, and you're ready to give up everything we've worked for. You've worked for, Kiva said tightly. Everything you've worked for. Because in case you forgot, I was locked away that whole time, having no idea what was happening. Oh, I haven't forgotten, Zuleika said darkly. You got to sit back and relax for a decade, while we gave every part of ourselves to the cause. Our blood, our sweat, our tears, all for you. Kiva spluttered. Sit back and She broke off quickly. What do you mean, all for me? Oh, please, as if you haven't figured it out, Zuleika scoffed. Figured out what? That Mother is dead because of you. Kiva felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. What? She breathed. No, Tor, Zuleika interrupted, slicing her eyes to him. If she's so desperate for answers, then she can deal with the consequences. A muscle feathered in Toral's cheek, but he didn't try to stop her again. Turning back to the white-faced Kiva, Zuleika said, Mother was sick, a rotting illness, something we couldn't find a cure for. She could heal anyone else in seconds, but her magic never worked on herself. The infection spread slowly over years, something none of us realized until it was too late. Kiva closed her eyes, remembering how Tilda had arrived at Zalendorf, a mere shell of a human. When the end was near, she became obsessed with freeing you. She was convinced that you should be the one to take over as rebel queen. Zuleika went on, her features grim, but Galdric and the other leaders knew Zalendorf too well, fortified, and the risk was too great. Once they might have led the rescue themselves, since Mother spent years talking about how powerful you were, even as a child. All along, they'd intended for her to take the throne and for you to be her heir. The quarantine blood in your veins was undeniable, but as Tor rose through the ranks to become general, and as I earned the respect of Galdric and his peers, they decided that we were enough to lead in Mother's place, even without your supposedly immeasurable magic. The rebel leaders knew we were Torvin's descendants. They didn't require anything more than to see us on the throne, but Mother... Zuleika looked away. The sicker she became, the more determined she was to see you one last time. Kiva was having trouble breathing. I was told she was captured in Mirrodin. She was, Tor said, his voice thick. But only because she walked right into Zadria and knocked on the castle gates, Zuleika said. King Narvok was more than happy to make a deal with the rebel queen, knowing how much it would annoy the Valentis family, and how desperate they were to get their hands on her. In return, he only had to make it so the negotiations between kingdoms resolved, with her heading to Zalendorf, to you. In a hoarse voice, Kiva shared, but I didn't get to speak with her. Not really. She was so sick when she arrived, and she was blind. You said she wanted to see me, but Kiva sucked in a quick, painful breath and looked down at the table. She didn't get to see me. No, she didn't, Zuleika said. And you didn't save her. Kiva looked up again sharply. I healed some random child instead, Zuleika sneered. Well done, sis. Way to put your family first. No, Kiva shook her head. No, that's not... Tip isn't... It was too late. I wasn't there when she died. There was nothing I could do. I can't bring back the dead. And what about Father? Zuleika shot back. Were you in the middle of an ordeal when he died too? Kiva turned to Toral, who looked like he was about to jump in and rescue her, but he hesitated, the grief on his face raw as he waited to hear what she would say. Papa made me promise, Kiva whispered. I swore not to use my magic, not even on him. And now both our parents are dead, and Tip, is alive and well, Zuleika said. Sounds fair. All right, that's enough, Tor finally stepped in, though his words were quiet. Ignoring him, Zuleika kept her burning face on Kiva and said, One decision, that's all it would have taken. What's the point of having magic if you're too afraid to use it? Tears prickled at Kiva's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had been afraid. She was still afraid. But even so, when the time had come to act, she had put Tip's life before her own, unable to watch as he... Wait, how do you know about Tip? Kiva asked, her voice thick. No one else was in the infirmary, no one but Tilda, who was already dead. Zuleika drew a finger along the rim of her mug. One of my rebel contacts inside Zalandorf was under orders to protect Mother until we could rescue her. When the riot broke out, she hurried to the infirmary, but someone else beat her there. She saw the boy on the ground in a pool of blood, knew it was a mortal wound, but later she saw you running toward the front gate with him in your arms. She thought you were being sentimental, had no idea you were escaping with him in tow. Zuleika paused. My spies at the palace confirmed the appearance of the kid, but they say he was perfectly healthy. It was easy enough for me to put two and two together. There was a lot to unpack here, but Kiva only asked, Your contact inside, are you talking about Cresta Voss? Zuleika nodded. She's doing great things for our cause, even behind those walls. Pity she's stuck there until she dies, Kiva muttered under her breath. She and Cresta had never seen eye to eye, despite her having saved the antagonistic warrior's life shortly after her arrival at Zalandol. You know she hates me, right? Kiva said louder. She threatened Tip's life, and she said she would kill him if I didn't keep Mother alive. Zuleika shrugged. She didn't know who you were, and she was just following orders. Kiva clenched her teeth. I didn't need the extra motivation. I never would have let Mother... She broke off at the triumphant look on her sister's face. Die? Zuleika offered. You never would have let Mother die? Let's move on, Tor interjected before Kiva could raise another defense. He looked to her and said, You have your answers, Mouse, now. Wait, Kiva cut in. The other night you told me you came to rescue us. Tor nodded, slowly. I tried, yes, until we were called back. But what about this Galdric you mentioned? You said he wouldn't let Mother risk the rebels coming to free me, so what made him change his mind? He didn't, Tor's face darkened with sorrow. When Mother decided to go to Miravan, she didn't tell anyone. She took off in the night, leaving only a short note explaining where she was going and why. From what we've managed to piece together, Galdric was the first to realize she was gone, and he went after her, probably trying to stop her, but he never came back. All we found was his cloak, covered in blood. Tor's throat bobbed. Too much blood. Kiva sat back. You think she killed him? Tor looked down at his hands. She wasn't in her right mind toward the end. That was all he said, but Kiva heard the heartache in every word, enough to know Galdric had meant a lot to her brother, and Tilda's actions, unwitting or not, had caused him deep pain. She reached for his hand and wound their fingers together, offering the only comfort she could, and then she recalled what he'd said, that she had her answers now, even if she didn't like what she'd heard. Thank you, she said to them both, barely recognizing her own voice, for telling me. Zuleika avoided her eyes, but at least Kiva now understood why her sister seemed to hate her so much. She blamed Kiva for their mother's death. It was unfair, but Kiva knew grief made people do, think, and say things they otherwise wouldn't. She also knew there was no point in trying to convince Zuleika that she had no control over Tilda's actions, nor would she have endorsed them if given the choice. It's your turn now, Tor said, pulling Kiva from her dejected thoughts. What's going on with your magic? Tell us everything. Chapter 14. Kiva took her time explaining about her uncontrolled magic burst and her fears of it happening around the royals. When she was done, silence fell in the command tent as her siblings considered her troubles. Did Mother ever mention anything like this happening to her? Kiva asked. She spent years repressing her magic. If this is a side effect of that... She didn't repress it, Tor said. When Kiva made to argue, he went on. She just hid it from the rest of us, even from Father. Little magic, she called. Zuleika said, her earlier antagonism having faded as she listened to Kiva, as if releasing her anger had eased something inside of her. Now there was only a thoughtful expression on her face, no sneer in sight. When she started strengthening her power to help our cause, she told us she'd been using it all along, just in small ways. A bruise here, a scratch there, always when we were asleep or distracted. She said she'd never been able to stop entirely, that the magic in her wouldn't allow itself to be silenced. Kiva rubbed her forehead. If that's true, how was I able to silence mine for a decade? Perhaps your magic is weaker than hers was, Tor suggested. Zuleika's eyes were calculating. Or stronger. There was a reason she thought you might be her heir. There was a bitter note in Zuleika's voice that Kiva carefully ignored. You want to know what I think? Her sister continued. She didn't wait for Kiva to answer. I think your magic is angry that you locked it away for so long, and these uncontrolled bursts are a way of demanding your attention. I think you need to listen to it, but you need to use it. Kiva leaned forward and hissed, I'm sleeping 3 doors away from Jaron Valentis. I can't listen to it. I need it to stop. As suddenly as it had arrived, the fight left her, and she slumped in her seat. Please, if you know anything, whispering she repeated, I need it to stop. Toril was looking at her with compassion, but Zuleika still wore a calculating expression. There is one possibility, she said slowly, someone who might be able to help. Who? Kiva croaked, willing to beg if needed. Tor's face cleared with understanding. He shook his head firmly at Zuleika. Absolutely not. Are you crazy? Inexplicably, an amused smile stretched across her mouth. I'm not, but she is, and then some. Tor shook his head again. If you have a better suggestion, Zuleika goaded, arching an eyebrow. Kiva interrupted to ask, Does someone want to fill me in? Tor pinched the bridge of his nose, but he waved a hand at Zuleika, indicating for her to go ahead. She did, offering 2 nonsensical words. Nana Delora. Kiva blinked. Nana who? Our grandmother, Zuleika explained. Mama's mother, Delora Quarantine. Kiva froze, having had no idea that they had any living relatives, let alone on the quarantine side. She has magic? Had magic, Zuleika corrected. If anyone knows how to repress it, it's her. She's also a raving lunatic, Toril said. Mother took us to see her once, right after we joined the rebels. She wanted to retrieve a family heirloom, but Nana Delora took one look at us and screamed that we were interrupting her book club. She slammed the door in our faces, yelling that if she ever saw us again, she'd ride to Valenia and turn us all in. Kiva stared at him for a long moment and asked, What family heirloom? A dagger, Zuleika answered, frowning into her now cold tea. Torvin Quarantine's dagger, passed down from generation to generation. It was known far and wide as a symbol of his reign. When Mother decided to lead the rebels, she knew having that dagger would help solidify her position, offering proof of our bloodline. But Delora refused to part with it. She's an apothecary, Tor shared. My guess is that she's spitting on our ancestors by using that dagger as her work blade. You know how some even asked to be buried with them? He shook his head as if to clear his thoughts, and said to Zuleika, This isn't a good idea. You and I may not have magic, but there has to be someone else who can help. Delora might be difficult, but she's Kiva's best bet, Zuleika argued. Where do I find her? Both Toril and Zuleika turned at her question. Seeing the serious look on her face, Tor said, We won't be able to go with you. She made it very clear that we weren't welcome to return. I got that, with her threatening you, Kiva said, but I don't need a babysitter, just directions. She might not help you, Tor warned. She wanted nothing to do with Tor, please, Kiva interrupted quietly. I have to try. She lives in a cottage at the end of the crueling swamplands, just beyond the wild meadow, Zuleika said, ignoring Tor's disapproving look. There's a small settlement nearby called Blackwater Bog. You can find it on any map. Head there and ask the first person you see about Mirkwood Cottage. They'll point you straight to her. Thank you, Kiva said with deep gratitude. Kiva, I'll keep my expectations low, she interrupted Tor, but if there's even a chance that she can help me, I have to go to her. She could see how much he hated this plan, but he finally offered a terse nod and said, just be careful. Delora is unpredictable and has a very unusual guard dog, the kind you don't want biting you. Hearing Zuleika's snort, Kiva decided it was better not to ask. I need to go back to Oak Hollow soon, she said. Rest knows I'm meeting you, but I still think I should be back before she returns to the tavern. Rest? Zuleika asked, her eyes slitting to Tor in question, but he hadn't met her, having arrived at the tippled boar after she'd left. Lucinda Lauren, Kiva answered, a healer from Silverthorn. She does house calls in the village, and when she heard I wanted to come here, she offered to be my guide. You're meeting all kinds of people lately, aren't you? Zuleika murmured. Not really, Kiva returned with a hint of attitude. So far, I've been too busy getting abducted by my own family, tortured by a prince, and befriended by a queen who unknowingly ruined my life that doesn't leave me much time to socialize. Tor leaned in close, his eyes suddenly blazing. What do you mean, tortured by a prince? Kiva quickly put him at ease. Calden has been teaching me to fight. Or that's the intention. For now it's just making me regret my last 10 years of malnutrition and inactivity. Tor's tension dissolved. You're training with Prince Calden? Being tortured, Kiva reminded him. I'm being tortured by Calden. What a waste of time, Zuleika said with clear humour. The only weapon you'll ever need is right at your fingertips. Kiva looked down at her palms. Magic isn't a weapon, she thought of what the Valentis family could do and added. Mine isn't, at least. Magic is what you make it, Zuleika argued. It's a tool you bend to your will. Weapons hurt people, Kiva said. My magic heals people. You said yourself that you've been repressing it for a decade. You have no idea what it can do, what you can do. Before Kiva could say anything to that, Tor cut in. There's no point to this conversation, he said, with a firm look at Zuleika. If you want to be back at the tavern before Lucinda, we should get going. He started to rise, but Kiva pulled him back down. I didn't say that we'd leave immediately, she said. I have more to tell you. Both Zuleika and Toril straightened, giving her their full attention. Kiva started, but for some reason she had trouble continuing. Don't rush, we have all day, Zuleika drawled. Tor shot her a look, then said to Kiva, take your time, gather your thoughts. At his encouragement, Kiva decided to jump straight in. The throne can't be taken by force. What makes you say that? Zuleika asked, her gaze sharp. I don't know how many rebels there are, but it won't make a difference. The palace is too defensible, she said. She made a split-second decision not to mention the secret tunnel entrance, since it wasn't as if they could sneak the entire rebel force through without gaining attention, or that was what she tried to tell herself, if only to lessen her guilt. Even if you managed to overcome the royal guard, the armies would be recalled and they'd just take the throne right back. I assume you meant to say, we, Zuleika said dryly. Kiva ignored her and went on. The only way to truly take and keep the throne is through legitimacy. The citizens of Everlone won't accept you, us, unless they're given a reason that can't be ignored. Something lawful, something just. Either that, or willful public abdication by the Valentis family, but we all know that's never going to happen. Lawful and just, Zuleika repeated thoughtfully. Dark amusement lit her features as she asked, how do you feel about marrying a prince, little sister? Is that legitimate enough for you? Kiva jerked backwards in her seat, her reaction just as violent as when Councilwoman Zera had asked Jaren about his intentions. But it wasn't the thought of marrying him that was so appalling. No, it was the thought of betraying him so thoroughly. Don't be ridiculous, Toril snapped at Zuleika, to Kiva's relief. We're not forcing our sister to marry anyone. That's not happening. When Zuleika raised her hands in surrender, Tor told Kiva, our numbers are strong, but you're right, we'll never win the kingdom by a show of force. And frankly, I don't think we'd deserve it if we did. Zuleika tapped her fingernail against her mug. It seems we have a new task for you, little sister. Find us a legitimate way to take the throne. Something that will make Avalon accept us as their new rulers without contention. Oh, is that all? Kiva asked with clear sarcasm. It's either that, or you find us a way to bring those royals to their knees, Zuleika stated. I have to admit, it'd be satisfying to see them abdicate of their own volition. They're not all bad, Kiva said, the words slipping from her before she could stop them. Tor didn't react, but Zuleika's face turned stony. You need to choose, Kiva, she said in a low voice. You can't claim to be on our side while staring longingly at your precious prince. It's him or us, them or us. You can't have it both ways. Kiva's insides twisted because Zuleika was right. She couldn't keep going as she was, scheming with the rebels while sympathizing with the royals. And yet, Zuleika was also wrong, because 10 years ago the decision had been made for her. The choice was no longer her own. It had never been. She would put her family first, just as she always had. There's something else I need to tell you, Kiva said, shifting in her seat. I managed to spy on a royal council meeting. Torel stilled at her side, and the anger vanished from Zuleika's face. They spoke for hours, mostly about day-to-day kingdom business, but there are a few things that seemed important. She paused. Something's happening with Miravan that's got them worried. Miravan has been threatening to invade since before we were born, Torel said dismissively. They've never managed it before. They won't now. Not without help, Zuleika said. Caramore is with them, Kiva shared, as allies, but soon by marriage too. I heard about that. Princess Seraphine and Prince Vershel. Zuleika snickered. Snickered. What a match! Before Kiva could ask what was funny, her sister went on. How is any of this relevant to us? Gritting her teeth, Kiva said, I mentioned it because the council is worried about Miravan, but they're not worried about the rebels. Zuleika's eyes slitted. Explain. The royals have spies among you. I assume you already know that, or you wouldn't be so cautious. Kiva tapped the silvery mask resting on the table. They're not deep enough to provide useful information, but there's a guard who seems to know more than anyone, including you, that the Jackal and Viper have quarantine blood. Toril swore, but Zuleika, but Zuleika didn't seem fazed. What guard? Kiva opened her mouth to share Idrin's name, but then she recalled what the council had said about the 2 spies he'd trained turning up dead. She didn't need something like that on her conscience, not when she was already battling so many other demons. They didn't say, Kiva lied, but from the sounds of it, he's moved up north and is no longer a guard, not until he'd fully recovered from his injury at least, so he's out of the picture now. Zuleika looked like she wanted to press for more details about Idrin's identity, so as to distract her, Kiva quickly went on. There's one more thing. Before that guard left, he heard about a secret rebel meeting place in the city. You might want to tell your Valenian followers to keep a low profile, because I have a feeling he shared the location with Jaren. I'll warn them myself, Zuleika said. Kiva breathed a quiet sigh of relief. If Idrin had indeed told Jaren the address, then at least the prince wouldn't be walking into something dangerous. At the thought, Kiva gave herself a mental slap, since what she should have worried about was that Jaren would learn rebel secrets. She needed to realign her priorities before she slipped up again and earned another verbal lashing from Zuleika. Did the council mention anything else? Toril asked. Kiva answered by asking, what's a royal tannery? Blank faces met her question. Tannery as in 3? Zuleika asked. The royal 3? She frowned. 3 what? Kiva didn't know, so she shared, I told you that the council isn't worried about the rebels. They think we'll eventually give up, especially now that Mother is gone, and with her, the figurehead of the rebel queen. They'll soon learn how wrong they are, Zuleika said coolly. That's not my point, Kiva said. When they were talking about it, the Grand Master mentioned something called the Royal Tannery. In what context? Toril asked, his head cocked in puzzlement. Kiva tried to remember exactly what Horace said. I think it was, without the Royal Tannery, there's no other way for them to claim the throne. Both Toril and Zuleika froze like marble. Warily, Kiva asked, Are you sure you've never heard of it? Zuleika unfroze first, shaking her head in the negative. I'll ask our palace spies to look into it. Tor opened his mouth, but Zuleika went on. Do you have more for us? Kiva held her sister's eyes, thinking of everything else she knew, including and especially the greatest secret of all, Jaren's magic. I trust them. His words flitted across her mind. Sorry, everybody. His words flitted across her mind, his steadfast faith in both Kiva and Tip. It was a mere whisper of a thought, but it was enough. No, Kiva said, her voice catching slightly. I've told you everything I know. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but at the same time a weight lifted from her shoulders, revealing what she knew about Jaren's power wouldn't change anything. Her brother and sister already believed him to have control over 2 elements, so what did it matter if he could wield all 4? Ignoring the churning of her stomach, Kiva kept her eyes locked with Zuleika's honey gold, connected to emerald greens. Her sister looked away first, but only so she could turn to Toril and say, Can you give us a minute? Tor hesitated as if gauging Kiva's reaction to being alone with Zuleika, but then he collected his jackal mask and stood. We should leave soon, he told Kiva. I'll have Oleg brought around and meet you outside in a few minutes. Kiva nodded, her heart beginning to pick up speed as Toril left the tent. I haven't been treating you well. At Zuleika's words, Kiva jolted, her gaze swinging immediately back to her sister. After everything with Mother, Zuleika cut herself off, looking away and biting her lip. It's been difficult for me, and I know I shouldn't blame you. It's just hard. When I look at you, I can't help thinking of how she went to find you. She left us and she died for you. Kiva felt like there was knives in her throat. And it's not just that, Zuleika went on, as if she couldn't stop. When I heard about the prince being in Zalendorf with you, about the 2 of you growing close, I was so angry. I didn't understand how you could cozy up to him while Mama was dying before your eyes. I didn't know who he was, Kiva rasped out. But even after you found out, you still stayed close to him, Zuleika turned. Gosh, from what I heard, you saved his life. A Valentis. You could have left him to rot beneath the prison, but you didn't. He saved my life first, Kiva argued weakly, multiple times, and I wouldn't have escaped without him and Nari. Zuleika pulled a face. His golden shield, I heard you're close with her, too. Kiva was about to defend herself, but her sister raised a hand. Wait, Zuleika said, blowing out a breath. I'm not doing this right. Doing what right? Apologizing. One word. And Kiva stilled. I've treated you badly, Zuleika said, semi-repeating her earlier words. It's because of Mother, but it's also because I thought you'd turned your back on us. After what you've shared today, I can see I was wrong. Sneaking into a royal council meeting. Even I wouldn't have asked you to take that kind of risk. I should have given you the benefit of the doubt from the beginning, and I'm sorry." Kiva had no idea what to say, unsure if she could speak around all that she was suddenly feeling. "I can't promise that I won't struggle with my behavior toward you," Salika warned. I need more time, especially to come to terms with what happened to Mother, and to try to sit and not see her every time I look at you." Kiva flinched. "But if you're willing to give me that time, I'll try harder," Zulika went on. "I promise I will." Once again their eyes met and held. This time it was Kiva who looked away first, but as she did so she whispered, "Of course I'll give you that time." "Thank you, little sister," Zulika said, her voice just as quiet. She then cleared the emotion from her throat and added, "You should probably go before Tor starts to worry that we're killing each other in here." Kiva couldn't believe it, and she actually chuckled. He's a lot more anxious than he used to be. He's a lot more everything than he used to be, Zulika said, with a comical roll of her eyes. "But no matter how much I'd want to wring his neck sometimes, he's a darn good general. Our forces would follow him to hell and back if he only asked. That kind of devotion." She shook her head, wonder clear in her eyes, a hint of envy too, but it was gone again in an instant. As if unable to wait any longer, Tor peeked his head back into the tent and called to Kiva, "Are you coming?" She sighed and rose to her feet, hiding a wince as she felt the movement in every part of her. "Until next time," Zulika said. There was enough warmth in her words that Kiva's heart filled with hope, the feeling remaining with her long after she refastened the silver mask, bid her sister farewell and left the tent. So let me just pause for a moment. Zuleika's private conversation repeated in Kiva's mind as she and Tora rode back to Oak Hollow, the pace much more sedate than earlier. Deep in his own thoughts, it was only when the trees began to clear in the distance that Tor broke the silence to say, "She wasn't always so difficult." Kiva's arms tightened reflexively around him. She hadn't shared that their sister had apologized, and she didn't do so now, curious to hear what Torel would say. She and Mother were really close, especially toward the end, he explained. They spent every minute together. They'd take off into the woods for hours, then return laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. There was such a sense of contentment between them, so much hope, so much love. Kiva's heart gave a pang of longing. "And then Mother left," Tor continued, steering Olex around a fallen tree trunk. "Something changed in Zuli after that. A darkness came over her, a deep anger brimming just under the surface. At first I thought it was just grief, mixed with the pressure of being the commander, especially with Galdric gone. But it's been months now, and it's only grown worse." His voice lowered. "She's keeping secrets, sneaking out of camp at all hours. She won't share her plans, even say where she's getting most of her information. The palace spies she mentioned, I have no idea who they are. All I can figure is that they're deep enough for privileged information." "You're worried about her," Kiva observed quietly. "I don't know who she is anymore," he replied. "I don't know the person leading the rebels. That doesn't worry me, it terrifies me." Kiva pressed closer, trying to offer comfort. "I thought you were co-leading them," Tor snorted. "That's what Mother wanted, Galdric too. But it's like when I tried to free you from Zalandor. If I make a call Zulika disagrees with, we can't risk division by arguing. I care about our people too much to put them through that, even if I... He broke off quite quickly. Even if you what, Tor? It took several moments before he whispered, I'm tired, Mouse. I'm tired of seeing good people suffer for a cause I'm not even sure I believe in. A cause I'm not sure I've ever believed in. Kiva stilled at his back. As if the admission had loosened his tongue, Tor went on stronger. Zalika told you today to choose, but I was never given that option. 9 years old, I became a rebel by default. Shaped and molded to become their weapon. Their general. His distaste at the title was clear, but then he released a long breath and acknowledged, I'm who I am today because of what they taught me. I'm strong, I'm capable, I'm a leader. I'm a warrior. I'll always be grateful for that. But this life isn't one I ever would have chosen for myself. Tor, Kiva whispered, holding him tight. He sighed and pushed away a low-hanging branch. It is what it is, and I'm lucky compared to many. A pause. Compared to you. Kiva's brow furrowed. Me? I would give anything, everything, to have kept you out of Valendorf, Tor said, every word filled with pain. I would have traded my life in an instant if I'd known they would let you go. His voice broke, I hate that you were alone in there for so long. I can't imagine what you went through to survive. I don't even know how you survived. I'm not sure either, Kiva admitted, shadows of memory filling her mind. But I did, and we're together again now. That's all that matters. Tor took a hand off the reins to squeeze her fingers at his waist. If anything happens to you... It won't, Kiva told him firmly, ignoring that she had unpredictable magic and was attempting to overthrow a kingdom, committing treason by merely breathing. But what are you going to do about you? It sounds like you're having second thoughts. How I feel doesn't matter. I've committed my life to this cause. A cause you just admitted you don't believe in, she pointed out. And yet I'll do what it takes to see it through. His words were unyielding, but completely without passion, as if he'd resigned himself to this fate. Kiva's heart ached for the little boy she'd once known, his dreams having been stolen the same night she'd forfeited hers. Quietly she asked, why are the rebels fighting for us? I know why we're on this path, but why does anyone else care enough to risk their lives? To them we're royalty, he answered, his voice now carefully devoid of emotion. For hundreds of years all they've wanted was a quarantine back on the throne, or at least that's the case for the most fanatical of Torvin worshippers, the ones whose families have stayed dedicated from generation to generation. But what about the new recruits who don't care about bloodlines? Kiva pressed. Is it because they don't like the Valentis family? There will always be people who disapprove of how a kingdom is run, regardless of who sits on the throne. So that's true for some, Tor confirmed. Others just want anarchy for the sake of anarchy. But the rest, never underestimate the power of hope, Mouse. Kiva frowned into the thinning trees. Sorry? The rebels weren't always so destructive, he said. Back when we first started to actively recruit, people joined us because Mother offered them something they desperately wanted. She healed them of their injuries and illnesses, just like Torvin did before he was exiled. But then, Tor stopped suddenly, but Kiva nudged him. Then what? He waited until they'd splashed through a shallow creek before answering. At first, Mother didn't ask for anything in return for her magic, but whenever we travelled to a new village, she healed everyone who came to her. But then one day she began to say they needed to earn their healing by proving themselves loyal. People were so desperate to help their loved ones and themselves that they joined our cause, waiting for the day till the quarantine would reward their devotion. As the time passed, she stopped healing people altogether and started thriving on the chaos caused whenever the village guards were provoked, almost like she thought the bloodshed would turn more people to us. In some cases it did, but at what cost? Tor shook his head. To this day, I've never understood her strategy, but despite the unrest, people keep joining us in the hope they'll be healed. But Mother is dead, Kiva said carefully, and neither you nor Zuli have magic. Her eyes widened, then not expecting me to. No, no, Tor halted her growing panic. Most of them haven't heard about Mother yet, and like I said, she hadn't healed anyone in a long time. Long enough that the rebel leaders endorsed Julie and me taking over despite us having no magic. It's enough that people think we do as quarantine heirs. His voice was bitter, revealing exactly how he felt about the deceit. Kiva closed her eyes, now having a better understanding of the rebels, but almost wishing she'd stayed oblivious. In her quietest voice yet, she breathed, "What happens if we succeed?" It was a question she hadn't allowed herself to consider before, partly for fear of how it made her feel. For so long she'd wanted vengeance, wanted justice, and yet she couldn't envision what a future might look like if her family did manage to take the throne. "Honestly, I don't know," Tor said, with another loud sigh. "In theory, you, me, and Zulika would rule together." He sounded as if he was swallowing nails, but Kiva couldn't help feeling the same. The idea of ruling the kingdom, even if it was her birthright. An image of a silver thorn crept into her mind, a reminder of everything she'd be giving up, her hopes, her dreams, her ambitions, her future. But then more images came to her. Keren with a sword through his chest, Farron being dragged off by the royal guard, Tilda covered in blood, blind eyes staring at nothing for evermore. 3 lives, all gone. Kiva could no longer deny that, like Tor, she was having second thoughts, but she also couldn't forget the atrocities that had been committed against her family, the heartache she would never heal from. The Valentis family had done that to her, and that was why, even if her heart was divided, she had no choice but to do the same to them, even if it cost her everything. Right, well, I think that will be it. We've been going for 2 hours now, and I'm starting to get really tired, and my words are being all jumbled, and my throat is starting to hurt from reading out loud like this. So I'm gonna continue this frenzy, buy some stuff, and then end the stream for the night. And I'm constantly losing my place because my eyes are just very tired. So I just read. I'm almost done, but we're up to chapter 15, and we're up to page 178. We just finished with page 178. So okay, done. Number of chapters finished 14. Number of pages finished 178. We read 30 pages. 41.5% of the book. So we are getting there. So let's buy some things. Let's go up to 110. Go to 70. See if we can go up to 30. Okay, there we go. Rainbow grandmas. Grandmas are twice as efficient. I need to ask Sharky about this this one, because I don't know whether it's a good one to get or not. Okay. Well, that seems like a good place to stop. 25, that seems like a good place to stop. So menu, save, and yeah, we'll continue next week. But for now, I will say goodnight to everybody, and we will be back on Sunday evening And Novak and I should be back playing Minecraft again on Sunday evening. So we shall go from there, and I will see you all in the next video. So thank you for watching, and bye bye.